Yeah, welcome everybody. I see people are joining us, so I'm just going to kind of go into our introduction. So welcome to this webinar. My name is Annie Russell. I'm the project editor for AIR, and I'll be moderating this panel that we have. This is what we're calling our pre-pitch webinar. AIR does what we call a bitch and pitch and panel at Third Coast every year, where we are going through and helping folks hone pitches. And what we've heard from folks is that it might be helpful to kind of go over some of that information about what makes a good pitch in advance of that actual panel. So we are just going to have this informational kind of session where we'll go over a couple broad things, and then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. And it's also an opportunity, if you're not going to be able to make it to Third Coast, you are still kind of in the mix and getting some of this information. So I want to introduce our panelists that we have today. So we have Angilee Shah, who's an independent editor and entrepreneur. So hi, Angilee. And then we also have Eve Epstein, who's the acquisitions editor for Marketplace. And so we're really excited to have her as well. Welcome.
Hello.
And also with us is AIR's story and talent curator, Jeannette Woods, who is also in the mix. She will be working with a lot of you in terms of, just getting your pitches and working with you for the panel at Third Coast. And so she's also here to participate and ask questions. So I think we're gonna kind of break this into just a couple of bigger picture themes to get into this while we talk about kind of pitches in general. So the first question that we at AIR get asked a lot is just what is a pitch? Or rather, what is a good pitch? What makes something a pitch as opposed to an idea or a topic? And so the essentials of a pitch, how to move from an idea to a really well-honed pitch, and pulling out the right details, the right voices, and the right angle. So I want to throw it to our panelists just to get a quick sense from each of them what they look for and kind of what to you is essential when you're reviewing a pitch. So maybe Eve, why don't we start with you?
Sure, and hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming today, and I hope that this answers a lot of your questions. The first thing I would say, and it's pretty basic, but know the show that you are pitching to. And in our case at Marketplace, if you look on our About page, you'll see our sort of description of what we are, and I hope you've listened to us enough to know what we are, but really listen carefully. We describe ourselves as a daily business show that gets at business and the economy through the unorthodox story, the casual conversation, and the unexpected angle on the news. In practical terms, what that means for pitching is we obviously are looking for stories that are about business and the economy. And we do want stories, because we're a national show, that are relevant to people everywhere. On the other hand, maybe a big national trend is playing out in some odd or interesting way where you live. And that is kind of the sweet spot. If you can identify something that is a big national trend that affects a lot of people, and it would be good in your pitch to tell us, what is your evidence that it affects a lot of people? But how is that playing out? What sort of maybe unique solution or unique idea are you seeing where you live that is the lens through which we can look at that trend or that issue? So that's the basics. There are things, it's sometimes helpful to tell people as well as what we want, what we don't want. I sometimes get a lot of pitches from people, especially those that are just starting out, about, this is a really cool startup. And that's not enough for a business pitch. For one thing, sort of in terms of journalistic responsibility, maybe it's cool, but maybe it's also going to die in a few months, because there are plenty of startups that don't last very long. So we don't want to just sort of give them a marketing boost. What we're really looking for is something that you know, I tend to not look at startup pitches or not take a lot of startup pitches, but if you're going to pitch that, then again, what does it illustrate that's bigger than just that one company? And if so, are there others trying to get into that market too? What is the trend that you're exploring with this idea? Not just, wow, here's a cool new app that can do X. It's deeper than that. It's looking at what the trend is, or why somebody thinks there's a business opportunity in that, you know, in that sector, and what does it say more deeply about where our economy is headed. So that's in brief what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you. That is super helpful for people. Angilee, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a really great sort of overview from Eve. I think, so my last position where I was accepting a lot of pitches was with PRI's The World. I accepted multi-platform pitches, so sound, text, video, images. So really we were looking at pitches that could tell stories in different ways. But before that, I worked on magazines, I worked on digital publications, I worked on a book. So I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly about pitching, not just to the world, unless you guys have specific questions, and I'll try to help you with the caveat that I'm no longer there. But I would say there are three things, much like, you know, Eve's startup company example. I'm almost never in sort of the news feature space looking for pitches that say, look at this cool thing, or did you, you know, like, have you ever heard of this person? And it's not that those can't be part of a story or part of a pitch, but I'm looking for pitches that are really rooted in verbs. Even when you're writing your actual piece or your script, verbs are really important. So what I want to know as an editor is what happens in the story. What is the action in the story? And then who is doing that action, or to whom is that action being done? So really think about your verbs. Where does the story begin? Where does it go? Where does it take the listener or the reader? The other thing I want to know in a pitch is, why should anybody care? So think about the audience of where you're pitching. Try to understand who their audience is, and really be really succinct about why that audience is going to care about this story. Why does it matter to them? And then the other thing that I think in the feature space sometimes gets lost is, why now? Even if your story is a little bit evergreen, I want to know, you know, if like I said in my bio, you know, there was one week that I got 200 pitches. If you want to raise up in that sort of list of review, and that wasn't every week, so you shouldn't be terrified. But if you want to raise up in that list, in your pitch, you need to say, you know, this is a story that will be really timely in 3 months when I can complete it, because XYZ. People need to know this now, because there's an election coming up and it's going to help them make a choice about something. People need to know this now because it's something that might affect their pocketbooks. People, you know, so give me a sense of the timeliness of the story. And if it's really timely, make sure you say that in the subject line.
Yeah, that is all super helpful. I would also echo, in addition to sort of knowing the voice and knowing the show and knowing the types of stories that are going to work, I am coming to air from being an editor at member stations. And so a lot of times we get pitches that are not the appropriate format for what it is we do. So really listen to the station. Those of you who are thinking about pitching to your local member station, understand one of the big things I hear from news directors and editors in the member station space is we get a lot of pitches for podcasts and we get a lot of pitches for long form reporting. We really need 4-minute news features. So really understand that, be willing to work with editors and talk with them about what it is they need and the type of voice that's appropriate for that space is something else that comes up for me a lot when I'm talking to folks about pitching various shows and podcasts, which increasingly are what people want to work on. But one of the other things I wanted to get to is if we can talk a little bit about that relationship with an editor, you know, how you make that contact, how does someone get on your radar and stay there in a good way, and how do you build that relationship, because it is a true relationship. It's really important as a reporter or as a producer to be able to accept an edit, to be able to accept feedback, and to be able to have that conversation. And then also, it's very important to be able to ask your editor what you need from them. So if you have a particular blind spot, you need to tell your editor that, you know, if you really are looking for them to look at your piece with an eye towards something specific, it's really important to have that communication open, as opposed to pretending that you maybe know the answer to something that you don't. So I'm wondering if folks can talk a little bit about that relationship and kind of how that gets built and how that works. So Eve, what do you think?
Sure. Well, I want to start out by saying I was a reporter. I started out as a journalist, as a reporter. I have deep respect for what reporters do, for what it takes to go out and to get a story and to make sure that it's accurate. And so when I look at the story, I am looking at it as the advocate for the listener, for our audience. I want to make sure that it's clear. Obviously, I want to make sure that it's fact-checked, and sometimes I will ask about sourcing questions. I want to make sure that the flow of the story works for me as a listener. I mean, when Angilee mentioned, you know, kind of the beginning, middle, and end, does that flow really work for me? Are you unfurling your story in a way that I can understand? And often with business and economic stories, there can be a lot of numbers. So what can we do to crunch those numbers for the listener so that we're not making people do math in their heads? So those are some of the basics. In terms of the relationship with the reporter, it is a collaborative relationship. I expect reporters to be able to take my suggestions and take my edits and to see maybe if I'm confused by something, that indeed that means that a listener may be confused as well. We actually have a pretty thorough two-step edit process at Marketplace, where I'll go through sometimes several edits with a reporter. Sometimes I'll ask a reporter to go back and do a little bit more reporting, or even get another source in a story. And then when I think it's reached the place where I can send it to, for what we call a back read, I send it to our managing editor, who takes another look and sometimes sees things that I didn't, because I'm so deeply in the weeds in that story. So it's a pretty rigorous editing process because we're a national show. But I also expect, and I sometimes will say to reporters who I've worked with for the first time, is there anything I've done in this story that makes you uncomfortable? I mean, no reporter who has reported on something should feel that language is being changed in a way that makes it inaccurate. Now, sometimes, you know, I will work to get away from bureaucratic language that doesn't, you know, that isn't conversational. But if you feel that I have changed that in some way that really changes the meaning, we should talk it through. It doesn't mean that we're going to still land on the bureaucratic language. What it means is we have to talk it through so that it is both accurate and so that a layperson who's not an expert in that field can understand it. So it's, you know, I sometimes go through several edits with reporters, and as I said, sometimes I'll ask reporters to go and do an additional reporting. And I'd say, you know, the best reporters are fine with that. They also will respectfully come back and say, hey, you know, this language isn't quite what my source meant, so can we find another way to say that? And I really encourage that. I want that kind of pushback because I want the story to be accurate.
Yeah, I think the pushback is really interesting because, you know, I think pushing back when you have a really good reason, often you can open your eyes to an editor. Maybe your editor didn't know, you have more information on that topic a lot of times than your editor does. And so, you know, we do make assumptions in editing that maybe we should not make, that dialogue with the reporter, I think, so important. Angilee, any thoughts on the relationship or anything else that comes to mind?
I was also a freelancer for a long time, so I know what it's like. And a lot of times what I advise people is that, you know, picture simpler stories first and find an editor you like, honestly, that you like to work with. Because for me, I learned the hard way, it was way more important for me as a freelancer, and others might disagree, but it was way more important for me to find editors I like to work with, even above programs and publications I like to work with. So I pitched based on editors I wanted to work with. And the reason for that is because of precisely what we're talking about. There are blind spots in newsrooms. We had a very similar system in the world, and that show was not as diverse as it should be. Often the back read was a person of color. Often it was me, because we didn't have that many people. So, you want to be able to find editors who you can trust, especially if you're reporting. I worked on immigration, especially if you're reporting like race and immigration for national media that is not diverse enough. So I'm going to just put that out there, as food for thought when you're thinking about where to put your precious time and work. But I would say, I really liked as an editor to get on a phone with a first-time contributor. So I think it's totally fine before you start work to ask for a phone call so that you can understand the editor's expectations, the process, ask about pay, ask about how long it takes to get paid, ask about all of those things so you understand your timeline and what you need to provide along the way. Ask about how, and also tell the editor how you like to communicate and how they like to communicate. Do they want a text message if you have a quick question, or are they better on email? Is there a Slack channel? Whatever, so you can get that lay of the land before you start. I think that's actually a really good use of time with your editor up front before you even, go start working beyond the pitch. And the other thing I would say is just be honest about what you know and what you don't know. Red flags, as an editor for me, red flags always went up when I had reporters who were absolutely sure about everything. I'll be frankly honest. When they, especially on the beat that I worked on, just because you can have different kinds of different kinds of readers look at your story in completely different ways. So I think just being honest and staying humble is really important. And when you ask for feedback, don't argue with the feedback. Don't be like, well, I think my way is better. Explain it. I think that's also really important.
I just wanted to add that as someone who's been a journalist and has done edits, that know that your editor, a good editor is your absolute best friend. They are going to make your work better. They're going to make you a better reporter, a better journalist, a better storyteller. And like Angilee is saying, if that can be a lifelong relationship. The first person who ever gave me an edit, my mentor, I still completely trust that person. We haven't worked together in a long time, but I will still go back to her and go, hey, did I, it's a relationship. And if you find a good editor that you work with well, it's just an incredibly valuable thing in this industry to have, a good editor that you trust and to work with those folks. Because I know that there have been instances for everyone when you're in the edit and you feel like you're fighting, it's a battle. Why aren't they getting me? But, as everyone has kind of said, take the information, listen to it, and like Eve is saying, consider the editor, that's your audience, right? So that's the person who hasn't been in the story that deeply. That's the person who is listening on behalf of the audience as well. So I just want to put in there that find a good editor, appreciate all the editors that you come across, and, take it as an opportunity to learn as well.
Annie, can I add one more thing to that?
Sure.
I think one of the hardest parts of being an editor and in that editor-reporter relationship are the cuts, especially for stories that reporters have been working on a long time. And the one thing I will say is, just because something's been cut or because we're trying to make a story a little bit tighter, a little leaner, it doesn't mean that piece of information or reporting is not good. Hold on to it. You never know. Maybe that's the second story. And just remember, you can't do everything in one story.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to just get quick thoughts on kind of this concept of front end editing. At WBEZ, we called it conceptual edits, but every shop has a different sort of way that they prefer to kind of start the process just at the very beginning. I think that there might be a misconception based on some of the folks I've talked to who are newer to pitching shows, that you need to have all of your reporting done before you pitch. And so I'm hoping folks can just kind of talk through, you know, what is the amount of information that you want and what is maybe too much, and how do you approach kind of those very beginning conversations about a story?
Well, a couple of things. I get stories often that have already aired locally, and so they're being recast for a national audience, which can sometimes involve a fair amount of rewriting and other times just adding a national voice or a national perspective. So, you know, but I do also get pitches from people who haven't started the reporting yet, and if their pitch is accepted, and then we sometimes will talk through what the voices that we think it needs and the scene where we might find a scene. When I do an edit, though, I actually like to do an ear edit first. What I call an ear edit, I don't know what other people call it, a live read edit, where I don't want to look at the script first because I am an advocate for the audience. Our audience doesn't have a script, right? Our audience is hearing it through the car, and the more I am embedded in that story before I've actually listened to it for the first time, that first edit is really precious to me as an editor because I'm hearing it the way the audience is going to hear it coming through the radio. Every subsequent edit, I'm going to know a little bit more. I'm bringing knowledge to it that can influence the way I hear it. So I really want to keep my ears as fresh as possible for that first edit so that I can really listen the way a member of the audience is and make change. And, you know, I go through that first edit just looking for things I don't understand. A lot of times organization, big picture kinds of things. And tape quality, you know, can I hear the tape? It's a pretty basic question, but if I haven't looked at the script, then if I don't have the transcript in front of me, then I don't know. Is the ambient sound, do I know what it is? I mean, I know these sound like really basic questions, but I sometimes get pieces where just someone puts in some ambient sound because there's a description for the engineer of what that is. Oh, then we know what it is, but you don't necessarily know that as a listener, right? You can't make assumptions about what it is that you're hearing, roar of the crowd or whatever. So those are sort of the basic things I'm listening for in that first edit and take notes on, and then in subsequent edits, dig into some of the fact checking, some of the language. So that's kind of my process, but I really hold that first ear edit, live edit in a special place because you only get one shot at it. So,
yeah.
To the question, Annie, about how much pre-reporting do you need to do before you pitch? For me as an editor, I don't expect, I mean, you know, as a freelancer, one of the most frustrating things was pitching a story and having an editor saying, please go back and do a week of work without pay, and then I will decide. It's really frustrating. So I would say at a certain level, it should be a financial decision for you. But as an editor, aside from a story that has action, that has something at stake for the people we're trying to serve, I am also looking for reporters who, while they maybe don't have an appointment yet with somebody, or maybe even haven't made the phone call yet with somebody who they think would be a great source, I'm looking for someone who kind of knows what they're talking about at least. So have some familiarity with the landscape of the community you're reporting on. I try to sniff out sort of absolute parachute reporting where I can, because it's not my favorite thing as an editor. I want a reporter who knows way more than me about what they're working on. For example, I once got a pitch saying, I just heard about this guy, Shah Rukh Khan. I think I'd like to edit him. And for anybody who knows anything about the film industry, Shah Rukh Khan is arguably the most famous person in the world, but he is a Bollywood star. So, you know, I read that and I was, you know, that's a really extreme example, but if something's brand new to you, you're going to have to do a little more legwork to get a pitch that you feel comfortable in, where you're not sort of putting your foot in your mouth about things.
Yeah, that's really useful. So I should mention that when we move to Q&A, there's a Q&A box for those of you who are using the desktop Zoom application. And so you can actually put your questions in there as you think of them. And when we move to Q&A in a few minutes, I'll kind of go through and select some of the ones that feel common or relevant, and hopefully we'll get to everything. But I wanted to talk first about just kind of like some nitty gritty like etiquette stuff, which is always really tricky. Like, what is that line between stalking and persistence when you're trying to get an editor's attention? You know, a lot of independent producers are used to sending out a lot of emails that don't get answered by editors. And I know from being an editor that I get a lot of emails that I can't always respond to, or I don't always respond to exactly as quickly as I would like to. So what is that line? How do you communicate clearly, and how do you kind of be okay with, like, maybe I don't get a response, or maybe it's a no, and how do you kind of deal with that, and also understand that even if it's a no on this story, that doesn't mean you should stop pitching altogether. So what are some thoughts on this?
Sure. I get a lot of pitches, like all of you, but I am respectful of the fact that people have taken time to write me. So I usually try, well, my process is this. I work with very busy producers, and I realized pretty quickly that if I fired off daily emails to them, it would just be really chaotic. So what I do, and they have learned this, is once a week I pull together pitches that I think are worth forwarding on to them, and not all are. And I create a list. It is literally a numbered list with the pitches and descriptions, and if they don't know the reporter, if I haven't worked with the reporter before, I do a little research. So it is helpful if you've never worked with me before to send me samples of your voice work and other samples of your work. And I try to make it as easy for the producers to read and go through as possible. And they know that it's coming once a week. They go through it, and this is what I get back. Literally, I want 1, 5, and 7, because they don't have a lot of time. So, but I do then go through and get back to everybody, whether your pitch is accepted or not, because I do think people are entitled to the courtesy of a reply. Sometimes it will take a while. I was on vacation last week, so I didn't get back to people. You know, I like to get back to people within a week to 10 days. If you write me the day before I send out the pitch note, you may hear from me sooner. If there are delays for other reason, it might take a little bit longer, but I do get back to people who have pitched me stories one way or the other and let them know whether their pitches have been accepted or not. And if they've been accepted, that comes with a lengthy note that describes what we're looking for, which show has accepted it. We have different length requirements for our morning show and our afternoon show, and you know, a bunch of other details about what we're looking for come with that note as well.
Yeah, that's super useful.
I mean, for me, if you find yourself pulling teeth to get an editor to reply to you, it's probably not the editor you're going to work with, to be frankly honest. I think, you know, as editors who are asking people to pitch to us, it's our job to be communicative. So editors are really busy though, and I think freelancers, you have to be persistent. There's no choice. That doesn't mean you email every day if it's a story that can hold for 3 months. But it does mean that if it's a really timely story, it's okay to write back 2 days later and say, look, this story is really timely. If I don't hear from you, I'll pitch elsewhere. I think that's absolutely fine and self-preserving for you to do. You should do that. You're running a business as an independent journalist.
And I will say that I don't take, unless it's someone I've worked with a lot, I don't tend to take a lot of really super newsy pitches from reporters. We take a lot of them from our in-house reporters, and unless I'm sure that someone, as I said, knows our process, knows our just some of the technical engineering filing so that we can guarantee we're going to get it to the shows, I probably am not as interested in something that's a quick turnaround as in this week, 2 days. Now, something that's 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, if I haven't worked with you before, that, you know, that might work. But I don't take things that, unless I really know that the reporter knows our system and can deliver, I probably don't do really quick turnarounds.
Which is kind of along the lines of, it's your first story pitching to a program, make it something a little bit longer tail and a little bit simpler than, you know, your blockbuster investigative piece. Get to know the editor first before you invest that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that relationship, and understanding how people communicate can be really important. You know, you might have an editor who is an all hours texting kind of person, and you might have someone who really just prefers to get a once a week email potentially. And I wonder, on the shows that you work on or have worked on, how do you approach communicating with freelancers around what types of stories you're particularly interested in receiving pitches on? How does that communication happen?
So I can tell you,
You know, that's a, oh, go ahead, Angilee, sorry.
well, so the section I ran for the World, helped found, is called Global Nation. And what we created was a weekly contributor email. So if you're what we considered a current contributor, meaning you had done a story in the last 6 months, there were 2 of us who edited the section. We would send out an email giving sort of a heads up about what's coming. If somebody's going on vacation, we'd let you know, just so you're not feeling like you're waiting around, and maybe a little shout out to somebody's work or an opportunity, grant, or a partnership you might go after, things like that. So we actually set up, and you know, a lot of what we did was try to open up the process because it is really opaque. So we had a pitch form, and we had this regular communication so that even if, you know, you're not an insider or you don't like have friends in the newsroom, we still wanted your pitches and your stories. It was really, really important to us.
And at Marketplace, it's pretty much me, although occasionally I work with another editor. And I've tried to make it really simple. We used to have, I think there are vestiges of it on our website, even though I've tried to kill it. Sir Pitch a Lot was, I think, what they called the server a long time ago. We don't have that anymore. I just tell people to email me. But I do prefer email. Please don't phone or text. Just send an email. Yeah, I correspond with people. As I said, I let them know if it's not accepted. I let them know if it comes in. I usually try to write right away and say, hey, thanks for this. You know, my pitch note is going out later in the week, so you probably won't hear from me right away. And then when I go back, if I review it and I have any questions, I will write to people. In terms of what we're interested in, you know, that's a tough one, because what I will sometimes tell people is we do have beat reporters on certain beats. We have a housing reporter, for example. It's a higher bar to get a housing story in. Doesn't mean it's impossible. I mean, housing is a huge topic nationwide, but I will always run any pitches on housing by that reporter because she may be covering that. We have a transportation reporter. He's done a lot on Lyft and Uber and on scooters, and you know, so there are some things where it's a slightly higher bar. It doesn't mean it's impossible if something really unique and interesting is going on in your area to get that through. But on the flip side, what I love about our freelancers is they really bring voices and experiences of people from across the country who we otherwise are not going to hear from. And that's what I want to hear. I want to hear about something that's going on. As I said, the sweet spot is really, it's both unique and universal. And I know that sounds as though it's a difficult mix, but when you see it, you know, when you get a pitch that's like that, you go, aha, you know, there it is. There's a story that's going to be of interest to everyone because it's dealing with some economic issue that we're all dealing with, but someone has found an interesting way to address it that may be universally interesting to our listeners.
And I will say, for me, when I was taking pitches, it was so hard for me to get excited about a pitch from Brooklyn. I will tell you that. We got so many pitches, especially about restaurants in Brooklyn. Unless you got some totally unique take, you know, just be aware that there's a lot of people around you who are pitching as well. Find your niche that's, you know, not the same as everybody else's.
Yeah, it feels like a 101 type of thing to mention, but you know, it goes back to really understanding the show or the outlet that you're pitching to, you know, listen to the program and, you know, follow the reporters on Twitter so you understand like, oh, there is a beat reporter on housing, you know, maybe I'm going to pitch something over here. I think that freelancers who are very savvy are very in the know about what is going on in the industry, and they understand like, oh, this is in this person's wheelhouse. Like, I want to pitch something over here that's completely different. I think that would be smart if you're really hoping to, you know, get stories aired on specific programs. So I want to just quickly go over like what folks need to know about our panel that's happening at Third Coast. I think we have a slide on this. Yeah, so this is, you can read through the guidelines. We won't go over everything here, but it's at our website, airmedia.org/programs, pitch panel. And so there's going to be a wide range of editors there going over your pitches. You can also check in with Leela Day or Jeannette Woods on that if you have specific questions. And so I think we'll go into the Q&A now, but so far the questions are more general, which is great. We probably are not going to be able to evaluate individual pitches in this setting. So just as long as people understand that, we're looking for more general questions about pitching and kind of how to hone your pitch. So this is a really good question that I am excited to hear answers to because I would like answers to this as well. So can you speak more to pitching a podcast series versus a single story? How should a freelancer go about this? Is it a good idea?
Well, I will acknowledge that that our podcast unit, our on-demand unit, is a totally separate unit, and I will usually just forward podcasts to them. So and they, I mean, they're highly selective. The podcast that they produce is the Uncertain Hour. You know, that's an in-house podcast. They're probably more likely to produce in-house podcasts than to take outside pitches, but that doesn't mean they aren't looking for, you know, talent or ideas, but we have a certain number of podcasts that we do through them. In terms of individual stories, I mean, our stories were a half-hour show in the afternoon, and in the morning, as everybody knows, we're embedded in morning edition. So they're short. You know, the pieces need to be for afternoon 3 to 3.5 minutes, and for morning even shorter. The outside limit is 2.5, but most features come in at 2 minutes. And you kind of have to know what that story can sustain. I mean, there are some reporters who are brilliant at creating 2-minute stories that feel really rich and full and have this great quick pacing, and they know how to, you know, come up with great clips that are short and that really move it along and can even have a scene or some sound in it. So you can do a lot actually with that amount of time, but those are generally the lengths that I'm dealing with. And so you kind of need to pitch something that can be encapsulated within that amount of time. But those stories can be very sophisticated and take on, I mean, what I love are stories that take on really tough economic or, you know, issues and really boil them down to their essence so a listener can understand. And when we can do that, I think we're really providing a service to our listeners.
For our Pitchin' panel, we actually will have 2 podcasts. We do have 2 podcasts that if you apply to the panel, I may be pronouncing this wrong, so excuse me, correct me, Annie, if you know. Dipsia is one, and the other one is, we have someone from Spotify who will be there. So you will have an opportunity to pitch there. And if you are thinking, because it's very different, it is very different from a feature. If you're thinking, or a news item. If you're thinking of pitching a podcast to one of those folks, reach out to me and Leela, and we can help you shape that up, read the guidelines, but you can reach out to me and I can give you some more information, because there's a big difference. And for this particular thing, for Bitchin' Pitchin', we're kind of looking to them to see, like, what do you want, especially from Spotify, and that's very new for us. And I think it's really tough to actually get an opportunity to pitch a podcast. So we're super excited to have someone from both Spotify kind of network and also from a podcast. So if that's something you want to do, because it's very different and it's new for us, reach out and we can help you format your pitch after you've read the guidelines. Hope that's helpful. I think, and also Marissa, I accidentally deleted a question. So if Marissa wants to put it back, feel free.
I think I was at PRI, which merged with PRX. So they have both companies, and now the merged companies take a lot of podcast pitches. But of course, the number that they actually produce is not huge. And like Eve, it was completely separate. I was forwarding a lot of those inquiries. But I will say, just from what I observed, a lot of times, and this is true for sort of series, if you're like, I want to do a series of 5 stories, this is kind of true for that. A lot of times they had a hard time hitting the sweet spot of being either too narrow or too broad. I think a lot of, like, finding that right in the middle spot of something that can keep people's interest over time, but also be about something and for some purpose was really, really important. I don't know if that helps at all, but certainly when I assign series of stories, that was we were always looking for that, something that could tell a big story, but wasn't also trying to be about everything and became untenable. We were always looking for that.
And I think for a podcast too, the same rule holds. It's really, the same rule is know that podcast, right? You really need to know that podcast, know what they're looking for, because I think they run into the same issue that features and news folks do. You're pitching, a story that's not a good fit for a marketplace or the world. So know that podcast, listen to it, listen to even down to how they develop the arcs in their stories. And then, that's going to be the same thing. Know that show.
Yeah, all really good advice. And this next question is another one that I feel like I hear a lot from AIR members. And this is a question about transitioning into radio journalism and podcasting from video. When it comes to fielding pitches for 4-minute radio stories, what would it take for you to accept a pitch from someone whose work portfolio is all video documentaries? And I think we could even ask this more broadly around, someone who's only been a print journalist or related. And what would it take for you to accept that pitch? And in your opinion, do those skill sets translate into audio? How can this person make the transition into audio reporting? So good question.
This is totally my wheelhouse, and I love this question because Global Nation was multi-platform. About maybe 60% of our stories came in digital first, so text, images, video first, actually, and about half of those ended up on air in some way. So, actually I worked with a lot of people to transition them from digital publishing, documentary, video, into radio. And I'll tell you, the way it happened was for people, one, to not be scared. Radio is a skill. There's an art form to it, but there's a lot about it that's very simple and a good reporter can pick up. And two, again, like anytime you're pitching something new to somebody new or a new topic, you don't want to start with like the most difficult thing. So maybe you're a really accomplished features writer or filmmaker. don't pitch the radio version of those stories. Pitch the simple part. So a lot of the people who were primarily writers or started out as writers who ended up on air for us, actually they didn't do full radio pieces. They did illustrated 2 ways often. So they talked to the host about their story, and they had collected really nice sound quality clips, often with their phones even, that could be used on air to help illustrate the 2-way. So getting that start in a simple way is really good. Before you sort of do all of the technical things that you need to learn as a broadcast reporter. Oh, and for video, all the producers I ever worked with are so terrified of people who work in video because they say that the sound is not right, that it's too echoey for broadcast. So, you know, get your mic really close and get the sound as well when you're capturing video.
Yeah, any other thoughts around that?
Well, I'm someone who started out in print, and it was a very painful transition to radio, I can say. But I loved it once I started doing it. It's hard. You know, I think people who are in video probably have a bit of a head start because they're already working, they're already thinking about audio, they're thinking in terms of scripts, they're thinking in terms of their read. I mean, I think the hardest thing, and I do think for Marketplace, most people who are pitching freelance stories probably need to have experience at a local level before they come to us and have some work samples before they come to us, because the producers do want to hear their voicing and their read. And it, you know, some people, I've worked with people from print who come in and they do a read in their naturals. I've done a fair amount of coaching, and they're naturals. And I've worked with other people where it's really, really hard to get what's called a natural read, and it feels incredibly unnatural when you're in that booth and you've got someone trying to tell you how to achieve it. So I think you have to respect the fact that it is a different medium, that there's a performance aspect to it, where especially if you're coming from print, you don't have, and you need to master that along with the technology, as you said, Angilee, that your miking matters. Whether you're close enough to your subject matters, or whether they're overmodulated matters. All those technical aspects actually really matter. Now, in terms of mixing the story, we mix stories at Marketplace, so you don't have to be a mix engineer, although it's helpful to know that process and to at least understand it, because there are some technical things that you'll be aware of when you're providing audio for a mix that you need to understand before you send in all the elements for your piece.
Yeah, so the 2-way example is such an apt one when it comes to member stations. I mean, every print reporter that a member station that I've worked at have hired, it's been somebody that we knew we could rely on to go and interview about their work, and someone who's able to speak about their work in whatever medium. I think that's going to be a good way in for you to kind of start dipping your toe into audio. And obviously, it would probably be a good time to mention that there are a lot of workshops available to folks that a lot of AIR members have, been a part of, and it's really not super time sensitive. You know, we get a lot of folks at our full spectrum, which is a week, coming from different mediums. There's other organizations doing similar work, radio boot camps, I would say. That's a great option for someone who's trying to kind of jump in to another field. Jeanette, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just Jackie, from video. I came from television. So I originally started in television, public television, and switched over. I did go to, I went to the Center for Documentary Studies. I kind of networked and found a great mentor. But what I will say is I'll just give this to the TV and video folks. You understand how to make a scene, and that is going to serve you very well in radio, because the best radio is a scene, just without images. It's an audio scene. But you, as coming from video, folks understand the idea of a scene. And when you can get a scene in, you're going to have, you know, something very evocative. So I would say, you know, when you transfer that skill, that's going to be great. So, you know, if it makes you feel a little better, I think that's a real good skill to have coming from video.
Absolutely. And increasingly in newsrooms, reporters are being asked to do all sorts of multimedia production work. And so that is only going to serve you well to have some of those skills already. Could not be a bad thing. We have another question that I think is really interesting. What do you look for in a pitch for a repackaged feature that's already aired on another program? If you're going about pitching that, should this person provide the audio of the previously aired feature as a clip and then talk about the different angle that they might take for a different audience, or how do you approach that? And I guess I would add to that, is there anything that would disqualify something in your mind that's already aired?
Well, for us, if it's aired on one of the other national programs, unless it's vastly different, we're not going to be interested. But as I said, we do bring to the national audience stories often that have aired locally. And many times what needs to happen with that story is it needs to be broadened out. So if your focus is on a local issue, then you need to go and do a little digging and some research into, you know, what that issue means nationally, whether it's how much something costs or how many people are affected. And sometimes also get a national voice, an expert or somebody who can speak to the national ramifications of whatever it is that you're covering locally.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I would just add, and this is just in general, make sure they know it's repackaged. That's, you know, like make sure you communicate that it's repackaged. I mean, that kind of goes without saying, but maybe not. You know, if you're new and if it's run before, just put that out front. That's always good to put out front. You have to, because that can cause some friction.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had that, and even not just from local radio to national, but we've had people pitch us stories that they were actually working on for other publications, and they thought because the world is in broadcast that it wouldn't matter that they were working on the same story for two different outlets. But, you know, especially for what I was doing, because we were multi-platform, it mattered a lot. And, you know, we prefer to know that ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that also speaks to just being aware of the guidelines around when you're pitching something, especially if you're pitching through any sort of open call or any sort of, especially for podcasting, know what you own and what the entity you're pitching to owns. It will save you a lot of trouble down the road when you then want to make that work with another outlet or publication. So just be really aware of what it is you're promising folks when you work with them on a story, and who owns your work. And that's something I think independent producers are acutely aware of, but is always a good reminder to just know that. So we have just really 5 minutes left here. So if anyone has any last questions that they want to put into that Q&A form, otherwise, I might just kind of have everybody go around and what did we miss? You know, what do you want independent producers to know about pitching that we haven't covered?
Ask for more money every time. That's what I'll say. Independent journalists don't make enough money, and often in public media, they constitute sort of the layer that makes many stations sound more diverse than they are. So ask for what you're worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say look for authentic voices where you are that you feel are not being heard elsewhere. Look for people who have something to say about, you know, important issues in their daily lives. And chances are, if it seems unique to you in some way, they have something to offer that the rest of us should be hearing. I mean, the economy is threaded through our lives in many, many ways. And it offers the opportunity, you know, and people love to talk about money, frankly, or lack of it. And so listen for those voices that have something unique and authentic and interesting to say about how they are experiencing their daily lives through an economic lens. And the chances are you may have an interesting story. And sometimes it's stuff that feels very ordinary. I mean, we did a great story out of Texas about someone who had a long commute to his job. And the reporter just followed him. You know, this is how long it takes him to get to work, how many buses and how much walking he has to do in order to get to his job. And it was a really interesting story about what this person had to do in order to get to work. And sometimes there are things that are right in front of you that may be of interest to a national audience, even though they seem fairly ordinary.
We have one more question, but I wanted to quickly say that just to make the push for Bitchin' Pitchin', if you're going to Third Coast, I know a lot of you are not, but if you're going to Third Coast and you have a story, I think, and it's a good fit for one of our panelists, it's an amazing opportunity to get in front of some of the, you know, top shows. So that's what we want to offer you continuously. And, you know, also consider this, you have made kind of a contact and you know, an e-contact with Eve and Marketplace and Angilee. So, you know, consider this part of the community. And for Bitchin' Pitchin', sign up, reach out to me. We can help you get your pitch organized and help you get it actually, like, who is it going to go to? Who's the best person on that panel to take it? We can do that too. Just let us know.
Yeah, if people can see the slide that we have up, email addresses are there. If folks would like to pitch or reach Jeanette about the panel, or you can email me. I do office hours with people where I go over pitches, I go over grant applications with people who are AIR members. So take advantage of that and reach out to me for that, or really whatever. If you have a question about a salary negotiation or kind of a rate thing, that's also something that I am happy to talk through with folks. We have one last question that I want to get to.
Good.
From someone, if you don't have a lot of clips to show as samples, how do you get an editor to take a chance on you with a pitch? I'll open it up to everybody, but I would say pitch local, get some clips. It's going to be a lot harder for you to do that on a national show, but that's my 2 cents. But I would love to hear what other panelists have to say.
You'd be surprised how many people write to me and say that they don't have pitches when in actuality they've written like 4 amazing pieces on Medium, but you know, I mean that if you're a writer, you probably do have a place to pitch. If you like sound, you probably do have some recording of something. So don't discount that. And yeah, I mean, if you start in smaller outlets and local outlets, that's good, but don't discount yourself, definitely.
And I would just add that there are shows, for instance, The Pulse, they're going to be on our live pitch panel. They take, you don't have to have a lot of samples. You may write an essay. They take personal stories, or they take first-person stories. They take non-narrated pieces. So there are shows that you have a lot of skills, all of you out there. There are shows that you can say, hey, well, I wrote this, and it's a fit. Personal essays are kind of, I say, for a lot of folks, and myself included, personal essays can be a gateway drug, but they can get you in and they can get you a clip, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that, you know, journalism is a bit of an apprenticeship. And if you start out local, and if you find a really good editor at a local station, you can learn a lot. And you sort of want to learn it in that sphere. I think before you make the leap to national, I started out at a local newspaper, and I am indebted to the people I met there who taught me an awful lot about how to do journalism and good journalism before I made the leap, to bigger and bigger outlets. So there's a lot that you can learn, and if you're starting out with nothing at all, it's good to start out in those smaller but excellent, find excellent editors and excellent publications that have high ethical standards, and learn what you can from them, because that's really the best way to get started, I think, in this profession, is at that level.
I want to put it out there too, because I totally understand the economy of this. For me, it would have been very not feasible to do this because the pay was just extremely low. Like, I literally couldn't afford to live in some of the situations where I could have gotten a leg up. I came into public media sideways. I actually started in a university-run magazine that was multi-platform. You can get clips in a lot of ways. So wherever you are in sort of the publishing world, if you're interested in sound, pitch that to wherever you are and see if they'll support you learning that skill and trying something for their organization.
Yeah, the good news is so many outlets are interested in audio right now that it's an easier sell than it used to be to get whatever organization you might be working for interested in some audio journalism. So that is good advice. Well, we have reached the end of our time, but I just want to say thank you so much to Eve and Angilee and Jeanette. I hope that people found this helpful. I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm excited for the pitch panel at Third Coast. I can't wait to see what members are coming up with.
And thank you, Annie.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, everybody.
Thanks a lot. I hope this was helpful.
Thanks, you guys were wonderful.